they get Toledo in 1085 is a major blow to the Muslims because it was an intellectual, cultural center.
Sort of like the lingua franca. The lingua franca of the Mediterranean was Arabic, right? So that's why they had to inscribe Arabic.
Yeah, when you're the dominant power, people learn your language. Richard Fletcher in his book says that by the 900s, 50% of Al-Andalus were Muslim. Small percentage were Arab and Amazigh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Pablo, welcome to Muslims in Europe.
Jazakallah khair for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my brother.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. So, Pablo, yourself, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Alhamdulillah, I'm a Muslim convert. I became Muslim in 2022, at the start of 2022. Weirdly specific, but I remember it was during the time of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Around that time, I took my Shahada. Very weird detail, but I always remember things through key events and details like that. It's the historian in me. So I became Muslim during my time at university. And at university, I was studying history. More specifically, a lot of Islamic modules. So I was doing this module called Muhammad to the Ottomans. It was very broad module on Islamic history from, the time of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, up until the Ottoman times. I remember I'd done an essay on the translation movement in Baghdad, but yeah. And then I'd done another module that year about women and gender in Islam. Then the following year, I'd done a very controversial module about Ibn Taymiyyah. Some people love him. Some people, don't agree with his opinion. So, yeah, I've done a lot of Islamic modules at university. That's when I kind of started to love the religion of Islam, our history, because before that, it was more about Spanish Empire. And coming from an Italian background, it was more about the Roman Empire, Christian empires and, Christian history. But as I became Muslim, I started reading more into our history and I found how fascinating it is and the glory of our past. So yeah,
I mean, it's peculiar. Like you're familiar with the Western history, and you're also familiar with the what do you call? No, I wouldn't call it the Islamic history. Yeah. I mean, it's still not just Islamic history, but the whole Middle East. But it's kind of controversial to call it Middle Eastern as well. So
I was specifically going to say Islamic history because before like 600s, I'm not really know that much about the Middle East, South Asia, Europe a bit because of my background, but apart from that, so it's you can say primarily Islamic history. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
So, you're familiar with this figure called Roy Casagranda?
Casagranda, yeah.
Casagranda. So, how do you? What's your opinion on his narrative about Islamic history? I'm sure he's not. I think he's not a Muslim, probably.
I don't know. We can't say he is or he isn't. Because that hadith about saying someone's not a Muslim, even though that hadith might be of for your intention, but still we don't know. We can't say definitively if he is or isn't. But I like him. He's my inspiration. Like I see how he delivers lectures about Islamic history, how he gives a true representation of our past instead of saying, oh, they done this, they done that. He actually talks about the nuances that happen in Islamic history. Because, for example, this is off topic, but people will say, oh, look at what the Ottomans did, or look what, this is extremely different, but what Aurangzeb did or Tipu Sultan did. These figures are right in my mind. So that's why I'm saying them right now. But then you have to actually look in, why did they do that? Were they bloodthirsty or was there an actual reason? And he's good at delivering this kind of narrative of, the different nuances and the different reasons why an Islamic figure done this or an Islamic empire done that. So I appreciate what he's doing. And, he's allowed many Muslims to understand their history. Like I was talking to some guy, we met up after a couple of years, and he was saying how he watched one of his lectures about the Iraq Syrian civil war and the rise of certain groups. And Roy Casagrande gave a, unbiased thing saying Americans done this, but they also done this. So he gives all perspectives. He's not one-sided, and he isn't an Orientalist, which is good.
I mean, I've seen Muslims have great interest on his books, and that's why I'm curious from a historian perspective. Do you think his narratives are, what do you call, unbiased or neutral, or is it what do you call? That's the perspective that I wanted to get, but you gave a very positive opinion about him. Alhamdulillah. So, as a historian, let's start with the first encounter. Let's start with the first encounter of Islam to Europeans. So, how does it start?
So, of course, the Prophet of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he, receives the revelation from Jibreel, and he starts sending letters to different kings across Arabia and even Europe. So, the Roman king, I can't remember his name, he sent a letter inviting him to Islam.
Heraclius, right?
Heraclius, yeah. Heraclius. And depending on the narrative that you get, Heraclius was actually considering becoming Islam. There's a narrative that says that he was looking at the Prophet of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his, credentials, as we say, and he was saying, okay, this guy might be a true prophet. However, he didn't become Muslim because of his empire was Christian at the time. There was no Orthodox Catholicism, because that's 300, 400 years later with the Great Schism and stuff like that. So that is one of the first encounters of Islam. Of course, after that, there was the Rashiduns and the Umayyads that, done raids on Sicily. And
so they came from the south, from North Africa to Italy. So from the south towards southern parts.
Yeah, so from
Europe.
Ifriqiya, which is modern day Tunisia, Libya. So they done quite a few raids on Sicily in the 600s and 700s. But as we know, Al-Andalus, the conquest of Al-Andalus began in 711. That's when, the Muslims actually set foot in Europe. And with the conquest of Al-Andalus, of course, there's always different narratives. I always have to say this because with every history book, for example, you read this book about Aurangzeb, it's different, but, they will say, oh, this and this happened. But another book will say, oh, no, this happened. So there's always different perspectives. But, apparently, Florinda, the daughter of Julian, Count of Quetta, she got sexually violated by the king of Spain at the time, Roderick. And so he called upon the Muslims saying, you need to take down this kingdom. And so in 711, Tariq ibn Ziyad led an army of around 7,000 men across the Strait of Gibraltar. And within about 8-9 years, the whole of Spain was under Muslim control. And another thing that not many Muslims know is that the Muslims controlled a small portion of France called Septimania. And it was for about 40, 50 years. But because of from the north, I think his name was Pepin the Short. He, in about 7 years, from 752 to 759, he defeated the Muslims. And so they went back to Al-Andalus. But also there was internal strife in Spain.
The terrain is actually very mountainous as well.
Yeah, the Pyrenees Mountains.
Pyrenees Mountain, yes. It's mountainous, so that's why it's very hard to conquer that land.
That's why it was a small strip on the right side of France. And that's why when you look at Al-Andalus, like the maps, initially, there's a small portion of the Iberian Peninsula that's not conquered because, as you said, that's the Pyrenees Mountains. So, yeah, very interesting facet of history right there.
I mean, it's difficult to, reallocate yourself to up the mountains, right, and cross the mountains. So exactly, yeah. So you started with Andalus. Let's go with Italy, maybe. What happens? Okay. The Muslims did go to Italy as well. So till where and when?
Okay, so in 827, the Aghlabids, they launch an invasion, and in the Islamic narrative is that I think his name was Euphemus. He rebelled, or he wanted to rebel against the Byzantines, who controlled Sicily at the time. And he was like, oh, invade because he's oppressive and stuff like that. And initially, the Muslims, they didn't want to invade. However, a Maliki scholar, I forgot his name. He's well known in the Maliki kind of early Maliki. He said, no, we should invade because Allah gave us this opportunity, and so we can, get new lands and bring new people to Islam. So in 827, the invasion starts. And in only 4 years, in 831 CE, Palermo falls. Palermo is the capital of Sicily, back then, and it's like the biggest city in Sicily right now. So, however, it takes up until 902 for the whole island to fall. And with Sicily, it was like Andalus, it was like Cordoba in the sense that there was a lot of wealth, it was splendid, it was like a thriving city, especially Palermo, a lot of money. And this is due to the fact that, when the Arabs came, they brought in new irrigation and agricultural reforms that brought about a lot of money. And also Sicily, if you see it, it's in the middle of the Mediterranean, a lot of trade and stuff like that. So Sicily, just like Andalus, was, had a lot of wealth, had a lot of money. And
didn't the Muslims also conquer parts of Italy?
Yeah. So I was about to talk about that. They reached until around Bari, which in the south of Italy is called the Emirate of Bari. But that only lasted for about 40, 50 years. So it was in the 800s, and it ended in 871. They got kicked out and expelled, and the Muslims remained in Sicily up until 1091, when the Normans conquered it. And then after that, the Normans they held Sicily for about 100 years, 150 years, and they were quite good to the Muslims. We always say, "Oh, this European power, that European power was bad to the Muslims," but the Normans were good to the Muslims. Of course, you need to pay your tax, but that's the case with everywhere. And the Muslim community thrived even well into the Norman rule. As Ibn Jubayr, a Muslim traveler, he was saying about, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of this, there's a lot of that, specifically in the Muslim quarter of Palermo. So they were still thriving past Islamic rule, the Muslim community. However, we see the downfall of the Muslim community in Sicily with King Frederick II. Maybe due to pressure from the Pope, they were like, you know what? All these Muslims need to be expelled. We can't have them so close to the Papal States. So what happens? He deports all Muslims to a little city called Lucera in Italy. Even though it's closer to the Papal States, he can control the little city and the Muslims. And what's interesting is that the Muslims there had a lot of freedoms. They had their own qadi, they had their own mosque, there was a lot of agriculture, stuff like that. So, even there, the Muslims had quite a few rights, even though the taxes they had to pay was much higher than the surrounding cities. And this is, I lost track of dates, but this is now the 1200s to the 1300s. But then this comes to an end when some people from the north, I can't remember specifically, they wiped out all the Muslims, sold them into slavery and stuff like that. And many fled to Albania, which is the first Muslim encounter in Albania, not the Ottomans. A lot of these Sicilian Muslims deported to Lucera in the south of Italy, fled to Albania. Very interesting. So, yeah.
And what about the conversion rate? Like, were people converting during those times, or they were mostly Arabs?
So in Sicily, by the time of the Norman conquest, when they started it in 1061 and it ended in 1091, over 50% of the population were Muslim. At least 50%. It could be 60, it could be 70. But so there was a Muslim majority, and there were quite a few, native Sicilians became Muslim. Just like in Andalus, a lot of, native Iberian Muslims and native Iberians became Muslim. Richard Fletcher in his book says that by the 900s, 50% of Al-Andalus were Muslim, and small percentage were Arab and Amazigh. So you see a lot of people converting to Islam.
And so we discussed about Spain. Then we went to Italy. Didn't the Sahabas went to Cyprus? So can you tell a little bit about Turkey and what else? Like actually the Balkans. When did Balkans accept Islam?
So for Cyprus, it was in the around 640, around there, the 640s. They launched an invasion of Cyprus under Caliph Uthman ibn Affan, and one of the auntie of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She was part of the expedition. Unfortunately, she died. She fell off her horse and passed away. And as a result, there's a tomb called Hala Sultan in Cyprus, in the Greek part of Cyprus. The Muslims conquered it. I can't remember specifically how long it took them to conquer, but it wouldn't be long because
it was during the Sahaba period. So
yeah.
The question is, did they lose it later, or it was still under the Muslims until the Ottomans?
Definitely not. Because the Ottomans conquered it in 1571. I'm not sure when they lost it. I'll be wrong. I'm not too knowledgeable on that. But you talked about into Anatolia and Turkey. So the Muslims reached, Anatolia by the 600s, straight from the birth of Islam. The Rashiduns, the Umayyads, they reached Anatolia, central Anatolia, because the Byzantine Empire was quite big before the Muslims came, and then Khalid ibn al-Walid, radiallahu anhu, won many victories against them and shrunk their population, their borders. So yeah.
So Anatolia was conquered mostly, but then we're talking about Istanbul or Ankara side and stuff?
Around Ankara, around them sides. Istanbul didn't get conquered until 1453 with Mehmed.
Fateh.
Fateh.
Yeah. So what about the Balkans? When does Islam come into the Balkan region?
Islam comes into the Balkans first and foremostly in the start of the 1300s. Yeah. So the Ottomans, Usman, he begins, it's only a sultanate, a little beylik. It expands, and then the following sultan, Orhan, he expands, and also Murad and those, early sultans, they expand and they reach, Bulgaria, they get Greece, they get Montenegro, that kind of stuff. But and also a bit of Anatolia, but they're still trying to conquer Constantinople. But that doesn't happen for another, 40, 50, 60 years.
Okay, so they already conquered the Balkans, but then
they conquered, a good portion of the Balkans. I'm not saying they didn't reach Hungary or Slovakia or around there, but they did conquer, Greece and Bulgaria already in the 1300s and 1400s. But also Islam, an Islamic empire was bordering the Balkans. Eastern Europe, more specifically, called the Golden Horde. So they became Muslim in 1313, and they were a descendant state of the Mongol Empire. Because when the Mongol Empire started to fracture, it went into 4 or 5 different kingdoms. Ilkhanate, Golden Horde, Yuan Dynasty, and stuff like that.
Do you have a map or something to show people like where exactly this Golden Horde or?
Yeah. So you can see there's a little bit of Eastern Europe, Crimea.
Huge.
It's very huge. And in 1313, Uzbek Khan, he becomes Muslim. And so what happens is that certain parts of that region, start accepting Islam. That's why, Crimea was Muslim, majority Muslim for about 300, 400 years. Crimea is that little thing right there, yeah, where your mouse is. And they are like the Muslims in Crimea are called Tatars, who come from, Central Asia and the Altai Mountains. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you have like these pockets. And also another thing, it reminded me, in the Golden Horde, yeah, when they became Muslim, some of the Tatars, of these Turkic peoples, they were Tengrists, and they didn't like that it became Muslim now. So they migrated to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Yeah, because they were invited by, no, they just sought refuge, sorry. Afterwards, more Tatars and more Turks migrated to that area of Lithuania and also a bit of Poland and Belarus. And these were Muslims, yeah. And this was throughout the 14th, 15th century. And it's noted that by the 16th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a successor state to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, had about 200,000 Muslims across Poland, Lithuania, and Belarus, called the Lipka Tatars. About 200,000 across 400 settlements, and they had 200 settlements and 400 mosques. So they had built quite a big community in Eastern Europe. And the reason why, these Christian kings, accepted these Tatars, these Muslims, is because they were great warriors. They fought in many battles for the Poles, for the Lithuanians, during their battles against other European powers and even against the Ottomans.
Mm-hmm.
And they said later on.
It's kind of strange, like Turkish people. I mean, the Ottomans are also sort of Turkic, right? So they have Turkic roots. Yeah. So like Turkics against the Turks.
Yeah, exactly. Both Muslim as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Fortunately,
it's the same. It's the same thing that happened in World War One. You had, unfortunately, Muslims from the subcontinent fighting against the Ottoman Empire, or you had Muslims from Africa, fighting against the Ottoman Empire as well. So yeah, and the Arabs as well. We don't want to get into that because that's a whole controversial discussion and debate.
So let me go with the historical side. Where did Islam come first, and then we'll go into the other parts. So what about UK? You are from the UK yourself, so how about the UK?
Right. So the first encounter of Islam that we can find is a Muslim coin. Well, not a Muslim coin, a coin with the Shahada on it. And also says, I can't remember the Arabic phrases, La Sharika Lahu as well. La ilaha illallah, there's no God but Allah, and He is without partners. We find it on a coin in the mid 700s with King Offa of Mercia.
Mid 700s?
Mid 700s, yeah. A coin all the way from the Umayyads, Abbasids, because it's around that time of the revolution, reaches England.
Sort of interesting. That's when actually England starts accepting Christianity as well.
Yes, interesting.
It's during that time, under King Alfred. That's when Christianity starts growing. What do you call Canterbury? You have all these saints. I don't remember their names, but that's King Alfred actually during that era spreads Christianity. So it could have been anywhere, like either Islam or Christianity. It's very unique. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And he took inspiration also from Roman coins, where he'd put his face, if I remember correctly, or he'd put his name, something like that. Because I'd done a video on this quite a long time ago.
Who, by the way?
King Offa, Offa of Mercia. And the reason he put his name actually is because Roman emperors used to do it, and it shows power, and you're like this, absolute ruler and whatnot. So he does it, and he also gets the Arabic kind of inscriptions, because the Arabs at the time were the power. The Umayyads, then the Abbasids, were the power of the Mediterranean. They had all the wealth. They had, everything was going in their direction. So having an Arab coin, kind of tries to, imply that you're powerful as well. But also it's the extent of the Arab coins, because the Arabs started trading. You find them all across the Mediterranean, and then even in like Northern Europe as well.
Sort of like the lingua franca. The lingua franca of the Mediterranean was Arabic, right? So that's why they had to inscribe Arabic.
Yeah, when you're the dominant power, people learn your language. So yeah. That's why English now is the lingua franca of the world, because America is the dominant power at the minute. Who knows who it could be the next decade or 2 decades time. Who knows?
We'll see. So okay, that's the first encounter. So when do they start? Like, when does Islam start becoming prominent in the UK?
Probably about 100 years ago, Islam becomes prominent in the UK with the migration of a lot of Bengalis, Pakistanis, Turks, even Indian Muslims, like from Gujarat, from Kerala, from Hyderabad.
I don't mean like conversion. I meant more like, so for instance, you take Ireland, where the Irish people were helped by the Sultan, the Ottomans. So that kind of, I'm talking about that kind of influence.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna go chronological, yeah. So I don't think big influence, but one of the kings, King John II, he nearly became Muslim. Yeah, so he was about to accept Islam. So basically, what happened is that during the start of his reign, he inherited a lot of problems, because King Richard the Lionheart, who was a famous crusader, he depleted a lot of the resources of England. So, because he went to do the crusade and stuff like that, and then he got captured by a duke in Austria. So England financially weren't in a good position at the time. So what happens is that he inherits these problems. Then he gets excommunicated by the Pope. Then he's thinking, you know what? I have no allies. Let me look outside of the realm of Europe. He goes to the Almohad Caliph, and he's like, I'll convert to Islam. So he sends a delegate. I can't remember. He's from St. Albans, I'm pretty sure. He was like a monk. And he was saying, he was like, okay, we want to convert to Islam, this and that and the third. He brought gifts. But then on the side, he was like to him, King John of England, he's a tyrant, he's this, he's that. And so the Almohad Caliph, he gave him more gifts. And he was like, okay, here you go. And then this is where the story peters out. So he sent an emissary to the Almohad Caliph. He was about to, he was hoping that, something goes well and then, becomes Muslim, but his own emissary stabbed him in his own back. And then after the excommunication of the Pope got reversed, and then he signed the Magna Carta, and then, he never became Muslim after that, but he was close. So yeah, England could have been Muslim, could have been Londonistan instead.
It's hard to imagine, but that history could have changed. Who knows? Like, you have in the hearts of Europe, you have the Tatar Muslims surrounded by Christianity or paganism, right? Any other kingdoms? Like let's talk about the Nordic countries or anywhere there. Like, when was Islam encountered there first?
To be honest, with the Nordic countries, I'm not too...
Because you have Ibn Battuta going, I think, probably to the Viking region, correct? Because he mentions blonde hairs, blue eyes. So it's probably the Nordic people that he's interacting.
So I'm not too sure about that. I do know that some Vikings became Muslim, but from after that, I'm not too knowledgeable in that area of Islamic history. But I heard there was some Barbary raids. I don't like that term, because Barbary has negative connotations. But from North Africa, there are a lot of raids, into Europe, but also as far as Iceland. Iceland's not really not Nordic, but yeah, they reached there with the raids. So yeah,
that's interesting. So the next question I have would be, I mean, we did go through some of the parts of Europe. So let's start with Andalusia specifically. What caused the fall of Andalusia?
So It's a very good question, and it would be quite hard to summarize. But I'll give a few points. So, firstly, there was a lot of internal strife in Andalusia. So, we have at the start, we just have the Umayyad dynasty there. Then Abbasid revolution, the Umayyad prince Abdul Rahman I, he usurps it. Then, but after that, the power of these next emirs, they diminish. And by the time Abdul Rahman III comes, his power doesn't extend beyond the vicinity of Cordoba. Yeah, because there's a lot of internal fighting and disputes between the Amazigh, the Arabs, and stuff like that. But he consolidates power.
What is this conflict? Like when people say conflict, is it theological disputes, or is it racial disputes, or is it power disputes? What is it?
From what I've read, it's more about power and racial disputes. It's not really theological disputes. So the reason why I talk about the start of Andalus is because it gives you an understanding of how Andalus then fell. So he brings an era of prosperity. However, when a king becomes too prosperous, there's too much money, he neglects his subjects. So by the start of the year 1000, around that, these kings, these caliphs are so powerful, some people are not doing as well. And so they see the Medina al-Zahra, and they see these fantastic mosques, palaces, and they get angry. And so they revolt. So then you get the first Taifa period around the year 1000, around there, just a bit after. I don't know the year specifically. And so after
there was economic disparity between the civilians and the nobles, right?
Yeah. So the Amazigh, not all of them, but a lot of them just got angry because a lot of the Arabs were at the top and the Amazigh were kind of lower in the class. They done quite a few revolts, rebellions, and they destroyed the Medina al-Zahra, the city palace in just outside of Cordoba. Then that creates the Taifa period. And this is where the Christians can start gaining victories because, you've got all these petty kingdoms dotted across Spain. You've got the Taifa of Granada, Zaragoza, Sevilla, Toledo. You've got all around these Taifa kingdoms. So the Christians, that's when they start pushing the Muslims. They get Toledo in 1085. And Toledo in 1085 is a major blow to the Muslims because it was an intellectual and, cultural center, and it was quite rich as well. There was a lot of wealth there.
Where is Toledo exactly? Where is Toledo located?
It's central North Spain. So it's not north. It's just above central Spain.
So close to Madrid, right?
In and around there, yeah. So Toledo falls, and but they actually took it peacefully. King Alfonso, he went in there. He took it because there was some disagreements because a lot of Muslims at that time, they were disagreeing with each other. They were allying themselves with Christians over Muslims. It was a whole mess, the Taifa period. So the Christians started to push them back. And with Toledo, it became a very important center for the Christians after, because they started translating Arabic works. They were like, oh, these Muslims are clever. They're doing this, they're doing that. So that's
when the Dark Ages, that's the fall of the Dark Ages and the beginning of Middle Ages or the Renaissance, where?
So the translations at Toledo gave the spark for the Renaissance. So they started getting all these manuscripts and stuff like that. And then after 200 years, the Renaissance began. So
although Middle Ages starts from the 11th century, 10th
around
century.
there, yeah.
Looks
so
like
that's what happens. This, scares the Muslims. with the fall of Toledo, because Toledo is a big city for the Muslims. So they call on the North Africans, the Almoravids, and they come in and they unite Andalusia. They're quite okay. So in some books they call them tyrannical, extremist, like, because the version of Islam practiced in Andalusia was very liberal in comparison to what the Almoravids were practicing at the time. So a lot of Muslims and Jews and Christians fled to the north into these Christian states because they saw them as more tolerant. But then when you go to Andalusia, because there was so much wealth for certain people that they also became liberalized and they became very not focused, for lack of better words. And so the Almohads came as well, and they were even worse than the Almoravids in terms of freedom, tolerance, and stuff like that. That's why you get a lot of Jews. One very famous Jew by the name of Maimonides, he flees to Egypt to the Ayyubid Sultanate, and he's the personal physician.
This is during the what do you call Murad when they came and took over Andalusia,
and then Almohads came after. So you have two North African dynasties controlling, and then after they kind of lose power, there's another Taifa period, and then that Taifa period causes more decline. More cities are slowly getting absorbed into the Christian Reconquista kingdoms up until the 1200s, somewhere the 1200s, where one of the Nasrids, I can't remember the name exactly, but he united the last Muslim stronghold. And this is where you see the end of the kind of religious coexistence, because the Muslims became a majority. The Christians were a majority in their regions. So it was like there wasn't that cultural exchange that occurred during the 900s or the 800s or at the start of the second millennia in the 1000s. So yeah, and they're able to maintain power for about 200 years because they pitted the different northern Christian kingdoms against each other. Aragon, Castile, Portugal, stuff like that. However, what happens after is that some, centuries later, in the late 1400s, Ferdinand and Isabel get married. And so they unite almost the entirety of the Iberian Peninsula. And so that allows them to fully concentrate on the Muslims. And so, they eventually defeat Muhammad XII, also known as Bob Dil, in the West. And he was lied to, though. I personally think he was lied to, in the sense that they said, "Oh, we'll guarantee you rights. We'll guarantee your Muslims these rights, that rights, no persecution, tolerance, mosques, adhan. You have everything. It's just like it's like Muslim rule, but under Christians." But this was a lie, because they sent in a bishop by the name of Cisneros. He started force converting. This is after the fall of Spain, 1492. This is around the late 1490s. Yeah. So
the Muslims kind of trust because you told me some of these Muslims were fleeing to the other side.
Yeah.
So that during that period, they saw the tolerance. They saw was it tolerant? First of all, was it tolerant enough?
In the Christian North, at times it was tolerant, and because you have to see the context, the Almoravids and the Almohads, they were quite brutal. Some people say they're extremists, some people they say a bit crazy. So they saw the Christians at the time as more tolerant. Not saying they were a beacon of tolerance, not saying it was utopia, but for them it seemed more tolerant. So that's
comparatively, okay.
Yeah.
So
comparatively.
that kind of that narrative for them when they came, when Isabella and Frederick, when they came, they felt like, okay, we can trust them like we trusted before. And that turned out to be a very backstab.
Yeah. So I don't know specifically if they thought like that, but they were given promises. They're like, okay, cool. They're saying this. We can keep our mosques, our adhan, halal, everything you need to run a functioning Muslim society. But the reason they done this is that Granada and the south of Spain was literally majority Muslim. So you can't just expel everyone. But what they did is that they sent in, as I previously mentioned, Cisneros. He tried to force convert a lot of Muslims. Of course, that causes rebellions. So in the Alpujarra region, the mountain range, these Muslim rebellions occurred. And of course, that was used as an excuse to do forced conversion. Wide-scale forced conversion. Either forced convert to Christianity, you get the death sentence, or you have to exile. But the thing is with exile, a lot of people in my comments on TikTok and Instagram say, oh, just exile. But exile was extremely difficult. It's very expensive. For safe passage, boy, a lot of people didn't have the funds to pay for that exile. So a lot of people force converted, unfortunately. And as a result of this, a scholar from North Africa by the name of Muhammad ibn Abi Juma al-Wahrani, he wrote a fatwa. It's called the Oran Fatwa. In 1504, he said that you can literally pretend to be Christian. So you can go out, eat pork, drink wine, do this, do that, but in your heart, just keep Islam, because the situation was so brutal that even if you professed anything Islamically, you'd get killed. So people were just praying with their eyes at one point. It was mad.
This reminds me of Uyghur Muslims. It's exactly the same scenario where you're not unable to practice, and there's a fear, right? Like the Uyghur's fate would end up just like Andalusian Muslims. There's a fear, unfortunately.
Do you know what it is? Yeah, this is a very nuanced part of this whole part of history. But in Islam, you do ghusl on a Friday, yeah? That's purification bath.
Yeah.
So what Christians would do is that they would do a bath on Sunday before going to mass. Sorry. And this was as a means of like trying to do ghusl with their intention. Do you get why? Do you understand the nuances? However, people were banned from taking public baths on Sundays because whoever done it would be a Muslim in it. So do you see how they try to like?
So they banned on Friday, not on Sunday. Friday.
No, they banned it on Sundays because they wanted to do the intention of ghusl on, instead of Friday, they do it on Sunday because they were forced to go to mass. Do you get what I mean? Okay,
but like,
every Muslim that was forced converted had to go to mass on Sunday. Church on Sunday.
Yeah.
And they would, do ghusl.
Yeah, they do ghusl. So you need to keep your ghusl until Friday?
No, they'll do ghusl for the mass.
Okay.
So they will try and like Islamify the religion, if you get what I mean. And so you are not allowed to take a bath on that day. And people would like wake up in the night and just pray, and that would be what they could do. And people would have to leave the doors open, because if you didn't and they catch you praying, you're finished. So it was a crazy situation for the Muslims. Sorry.
When you talk about Muslims, enlighten me. Are these Spaniards, or are these Arabs and Amazigh and other groups? Because you see, like, there's not a lot of focus on Christians, modern day Christians. They're rather racist. There's not much of a focus on Christianizing. There's just blatant racism. So did they see the Spaniards as like betrayals? Because as a convert, you get these terms like you've betrayed the religion, you've betrayed the culture.
You've betrayed the race.
How does that work in Spain? Like, because if they forcefully converted, is it because they feel like they betrayed the culture and tradition, or is it more like what was going on?
So it was more like you're just Muslim or not. Do you get what I mean? It wasn't a thing, oh, you betrayed us, so we're gonna do this and do that against you. Basically, when you become Muslim, you no longer are a Spaniard anyway. The same way in the Balkans, I know this is on another tangent, but it rings true, is that when a Bulgarian, a Greek, a Bosnian, a Serb, you name it, anyone became Muslim, they were just classified as Turk. They were just, you're Turk. So that's why there's a lot of Muslims in Crete back in the day. It was about 50, 60, 70. It was a quite sizable majority of minorities. Sorry, my numbers get mixed up. So, but Crete, a lot of Muslims. But they were called not the Cretan Muslims, they were called the Cretan Turks, even though they were
the
Greek.
Bosniaks or Greeks, like you said, yeah. So that's what is confusing me. Like, why would you go forcefully convert some people unless and until you have this mentality like, oh, you betrayed, that's why you want to go and convert them back, because that's what they try to do, right? Like missionaries, or you left the religion, we need to get you back, but they're not really focusing on others, right?
Well, sorry, what do you mean? Like
missionaries, when I mean, I'm sure, like, if you had conversations with Christian missionaries, they would try. I mean, you would see the perception that, like, as if like you betrayed.
Yeah. Of course,
and they try to get you back.
Yeah,
because
but I don't think with Andalus that was the case. In Serbia and in the Balkans, that was the case. They were trying to make them Christian again. Do you get what I mean? But with Spain, it was just, you're Muslim or not. It's not like, oh, you need to come back to our religion and stuff like that. It was a bit different there. It was just, they didn't like Muslims. They wanted them out. They wanted to purge the religion from the peninsula, but they couldn't do it straight away. So they force converted, under the thing of death. And then after, they just exiled all of them in 1609.
Exiled Muslims. So those who did not convert.
No, Moriscos. These are the Muslims that converted to Christianity, quote unquote. But they were just scared that even these Moriscos who pretend to be Christian might be still Muslim, which many were, innit? So yeah, that's what happens. But you
see the racial element. It's not just theological. Even when you're telling me, it feels like a racial element is still lingering. Like, yes, we forcefully converted you, but then you're an outsider still. So I feel
it becomes that, because when you become Muslim, you get excommunicated from the race. Like, yes, I posted a video about these Greek Muslims, called the Vela Hades. They've converted to Islam quite late, 1700s, 1800s. And a lot of Greeks in the comments saying they're not Greek anymore. They're not Greek. So this thing is throughout a lot of races that have two religions. Like, you're not Greek anymore. You're not Spanish. You're not Italian. You're not this. You're not that, because you become Muslim. That's why they would call a lot of these Muslims that converted in the Balkans Turks. Because, you take their religion, and probably you most likely you talk in Turkish now instead of Greek or Bosniak or Bulgarian and whatnot.
Yeah, why don't you speak Malay? Why Turkish? Okay, so give me one little insight about Andalusia. Still, I don't get the picture. I've been to Portugal, Lisbon, and like the southern parts of Andalusia, it's very different from even Portugal, their neighbor. And I understand why it's different from the north, but the south is very, very, like, one of the beautiful parts when you talked about Andalusia, about the irrigation in Sicily. I think that's what was beautiful about Andalusia for me. Like, everywhere you go, you just see mountain ranges of olive trees. Like, it's baffling, seriously, the irrigation system, because I've seen many places, and I haven't seen any dried up place, rocky mountains turned into olive plantations. And I didn't see that in the western side. I've seen it in Andalusian part. So what was the economic prosperity that was happening in this region, but not in the Portugal region? Why not?
To be honest, this one I'm not really sure. Like a lot of the cities, when read books about Al-Andalus, they always focus on Cordoba, Granada, Malaga, Toledo before it got reconquered, but they never talk about Lisbon and stuff like that. When the Muslims knew, like, literally held Portugal for a long time. It was called Al-Harb, I think, or Al-Garb, or something along those lines. But
I haven't seen that architecture. I haven't seen that investment that they've done in Andalusian region. I haven't seen that in Portugal, and that's what I'm curious. Like, why was their focus? Is it because of the cities that the hub was Andalusia, Granada, and these were the closest cities, or is it because why was there no much focus in Lisbon?
To be honest, I'm not quite sure, but one thing I can kind of say is that if we think the Spanish were brutal, the Portuguese were even worse. And so they probably tried to rid a lot of the remnants of Islam. Like even in Spain, you don't have that much remnants. Yeah, you have Alhambra, you have things in Malaga and stuff like that. But a lot of the Islamic influences in these two countries have been, systematically eliminated. So, yeah.
I'm not talking about the palaces. Like I'm talking even the vegetation. I was trying to look for the vegetations and stuff, like to see the remnants. Couldn't even find that. So
you've piqued my interest. I might need to read into it.
Sure, because I had this encounter. One of my I came across a person from one of the Caribbean countries, Puerto Rico. Yeah, and she told me, because I met a Spanish guy and he told me he was proud of, like, he's not a racist, but he just said he's proud of chasing away the Muslims from Spain. And this lady, she told me, like, it's actually the Muslims who, brought prosperity to the Iberian Peninsula, and it's mostly through vegetation. And she was talking how the Spaniards were were unable to cultivate anything, and it was the Muslims who brought this advanced irrigation system. So when I saw it, I was like, okay, this is baffling. Never seen anything like this. Like mountain hills turned into olive plantation fields. Never seen big hills. Small areas, yes, I can get it. But this was on a massive level, and I would suggest you to go during summer if you have the opportunity to see the olive. Insha'Allah.
It's because the Arabs had a mini agricultural revolution in the 700s. That's why, Sicily prospered, Spain prospered, because of the new agricultural techniques that they brought into these newly conquered lands. So yeah,
it's not really benefiting the rich. I think it's mostly the farmers that benefit from that, and that's the beauty. And
back in those times, most people were cultivating and whatnot. Like it was very much, most people were, make their own food and stuff like that. So it wasn't really like, how nowadays we have cities where you go to the supermarket and, not many people are farmers nowadays. It was much different back then.
Yeah. And to see that piqued my interest, and I was very interested. And I didn't see that in Portugal, and that's why I was like, okay, is it because of the hub or something? So coming back to what do you call a little bit about the Ottoman, because we need to understand the history. Like most of Europe has this trauma. I don't know, but like a hatred towards the Ottoman history or the Muslim history through the Ottoman lenses. So can you speak a little bit briefly on that part? Like where were they until which place? What happened?
All right. So from my understanding, with the Ottoman Empire, the reason why many people hate them, and it's because firstly, they had the dervishment system where they would go to Europe, the strongest Christian boys, and they'll take them and raise them up as soldiers or grand viziers and any, someone in a high position to serve the Sultan. We also have instances. I say this because a lot of these claims are not really factual. They say they went and force converted a lot of people, which is actually very,
Rare.
Minimal. Yeah, like very minimal. Maybe here and there, but a historian by the name of Thomas Arnold Walker, he talks about how there was a lot of dawah, a lot of Sufi missionaries that went to these places and converted people to Islam. So this claim is, can be debunked easily. Even so, like I was reading into these Muslims from Bulgaria called the Pomaks.
Mm-hmm.
And, early historians say, oh, yeah, they were converted in this time and that time. But then in reality, new literature comes showing that they weren't converted. They just accepted Islam. And of course, you get the Orientalist idea that people only converted for beneficial reasons. Oh, to avoid the jizya, to gain social hierarchy.
Jizya was a small amount, right?
Yeah. But yeah, these reasons, they are reasons, but it's not the whole reason. Of course, people understood the teachings of the deen and they were like, okay, cool, let me accept this. So there was a lot of reasons. And another reason why the Ottomans are hated is because what the late Ottoman government done to Armenians, Greeks, Assyrians, what they done.
You mean the Young Turks?
The Young Turks, yeah.
Young Turks, okay.
By Enver
Which is a
Pasha,
secular movement rather than...
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why there's a lot of hatred towards the Ottomans. But
I mean, it's strange, right? Like it's actually the secularists who did the oppression. And then the whole, because of the raciality that Europe has projected, because they adopted the European model, but because of their race, they have pictured like, okay, the whole Ottoman Empire, Islam is this.
Yeah. So let me go back a bit in time. Yeah. So the Russians, they start conquering lands. They conquered Crimea in 1783. Mm-hmm. Crimea was not, as I said before, 95% Muslim. Crimea today is about 14% Muslim. In the 1940s, there's 2%. Yeah. From 1783 to the 1940s, there was a systematic persecution of Muslims. So a lot of Crimean Tatars fled to the Dobruja region in Eastern Europe. So on the coast of the Black Sea between Romania and Bulgaria. Mm-hmm. Russia done the same thing in the Caucasus. So what not many people know, inshallah it gets more known as the time goes on, is something called the Circassian genocide, where about 1.5 million Muslims of Circassian origin, but also Chechen, Dagestani, and those regions. I could list off a bunch of ethnic groups, but I don't think many people will know these ethnic groups. We
know Chechnya, we know Dagestan.
Yeah. So, and that region, just Muslims in that region, they got persecuted by the Russians, and many fled to the Dobruja region as well on the Black Sea. And this is now 1860s, 1870, because Russians expelled all these people, and you've got like 200, 300,000 Muslims in that Black Sea region alone. Many others went to Anatolia and stuff like that. And many died at sea, unfortunately. They start doing banditry, these Circassians, Chechens, Dagestanis. And the reason for this is because the Ottoman state can't handle all these immigrants, all these muhajirs. Yeah, they can't handle them. So what happens is that, they go crazy. They need to find a way to live and make money. And so they start harassing Bulgarians. Then Bulgarians, Romanians, they start fighting back. And so then the Bulgarians and Romanians and all these people in these regions are like, you know what? We want independence. And so these Muslims that fled Russia kind of not directly caused, but are one of the key elements in the Ottoman collapse in the Balkans. But it's not even the Ottomans' fault. It's the Russians who expelled all these people. So yeah. And then from then on, about 5.5 million Muslims were killed. Russia, Crimea, the Balkans, 5.5 million Muslims. And about 5 to 9 million Muslims were expelled. So you've got big populations of Muslims in Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, Montenegro, Serbia, Bosnia,
And
as
these are
far as
Slavic.
Hungary.
Are these the Slavs or Turkic?
Slavs, Turkic, different amalgamations of people. They flee
Coming to Europe.
and they go to Edirne, European side of Turkey.
That's terrible. So,
And
okay,
so,
I think,
like,
yeah, go ahead.
For example, in the Balkan Wars, there was a ridiculous amount of Muslim refugees and Muslim casualties in the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913. Like mass amounts of people fleeing to Istanbul, Edirne, and stuff like that.
So this triggered the Balkan Wars, Yugoslavia's, Romania.
Oh no, not Yugoslavia. But these refugees kind of are one of the triggers towards the Balkan Wars of the 1870s. So it's called the Eastern Question, the Great Eastern Crisis, other scholars call it, because, there was a lot of nationalism, there was a lot of sectarian violence, but it was actually, spurred on by the fact that these Russians, they, expelled all these Muslims, and then these Muslims had no money, had no kind of subsistence, so they had to do by any means. So that's why you get a lot of these people called Bashi books, yeah, a type of soldier that they go crazy during the Balkan War, it was actually called the Russo-Turkish War of 1878 to 1877 to 1878. 18, yeah, I got it right.
But so do you think, because you also have a big chunk of population of Romas in Romania and Bulgaria, so do you think that there were ethnic tensions over there? It's a hub for multiculturalism there.
To be honest,
poverty, of course.
With them, there's not really they're always persecuted and whatnot, but even when they're Muslim, they were getting persecuted. Like the Ottomans, they didn't have fond perceptions of the Roma. Like they would have the least amount of rights amongst the other kind of Muslims in the Balkans. So yeah, but regarding the question you asked, I'm not too sure if they also played a role in the nationalism, because it was more like, oh, we're Christian Bulgarians, we're Christian Greeks, we're Christian Serbs, we're Catholic Croats. Do you get what I mean?
So let's go back to Austria.
Yeah.
So is it because of that perception, or is it more than that? Because there's always a war between the Ottomans and the Austria. That's what most of the Europeans talk about, right? The war between Ottomans and the fall of the Ottomans in Austria.
Yeah. So it's not, I wouldn't say Austria has a big part to play in their downfall in the Balkans because of nationalism. I think it was more of a French and Russian influence. So in the Balkans, there's a lot of Orthodox, yeah? And the Russians are Orthodox. So they kind of spur these Orthodox to gain freedom and gain autonomy over the Ottomans. And then the French, they influence due to their kind of Enlightenment, romantic nationalism, as they call it, where the Greeks first gain independence in 1821. They begin their War of Independence, and it's not recognized until 1829, 1830. And so, yeah, but they actually have a small piece of Greece. Like, you see modern day Greece, they have about maybe 1/4 of it. And so
France.
that kind of...
France has appeared.
Yeah, of what they gained. So the Ottomans still controlled a lot well into the 1820s, 1830s. So yeah, it's a lot of influence from the West of this nationalism that goes into the Ottoman Empire, and it also goes into the Arab lands as well. But that's a conversation for another day.
Inshallah, for another day. So I think I have very little time. Can you tell me the importance of history, learning history, and also the importance of teaching as Muslims, the importance of teaching history?
Okay, so I need to be as quick as possible because I can see the timer as well.
Yeah.
So why should we learn history? Well, especially right now, the Muslim situation isn't a good one. Countries are failing, a lot of wars, a lot of bad things are happening, and we need to reclaim the glory. And the only way you do that is through your history. If you learn about Andalus, Sicily, Ottoman Empire, you learn about all these, great civilizations, Cairo, you name it, Samarkand. Now we're going to Asia, Africa, and whatnot. But you learn, oh, we were actually good. Let's replicate what they did. What did they do that went well? What did they do that caused their downfall? And so you implement the good and you stay away from the bad. So that's why it's important to learn. Why is it important to teach? Well, we can't learn our history from non-Muslims, I think. Of course, it's good. Like, I've got a lot of books by Audrey Trush, by Maria Menosa, like all these non-Muslim figures that talk about different aspects of history. But Muslims should teach, in my opinion, because we know it best. We can give the nuances. We can understand why this happened, why that happened. We can try to be as fair and, just as possible, teaching our history. We can show the glory. We can show why it happens. Do you get what I mean? So that's why I think we need more teachers. We need more people learning history. And quickly, I've got 3 minutes. I'm going to say this last point.
Sure. Yeah.
A lot of people don't do history because it doesn't pay well. And I completely agree. I didn't want to do history. The reason for this is because I knew that I'd have to do this, that, the third PhD, and then finally maybe get 30, 40, 50K salary. But with the rise of the internet, it's made it easier to kind of gain traction, maybe get more money. So, and, get your higher rank, because of course you need subsistence and stuff like that. So people need to do history because then we have Muslims that teach history that can then, give knowledge to the new generations that come. And then we can implement the good that's happened and stay away from the bad, and then create a good civilization.
I think it's also
prosperous ummah.
I think it's also a counter narrative to what Edward Said or Halak are conveying, because I think right now the Orientalists that talk about the Muslims are either Edward Said or Halak. So it's reclaiming, the Muslims are claiming who we are, and to narrate like our story. Where do we come from? Like I think I started with a conversation with Roy Casagranda. I don't know if he's a Muslim or not, but like you have now a Muslim, like a known Muslim, somebody who calls himself as a Muslim and proud to be a Muslim to narrate the story, right? Yeah.
So we need like more Muslims in the space, and
alhamdulillah, we have you, and inshallah,
we've got Harris as well. We've got this guy called Alan, someone that I've done a lot of collaborations with, Ashman. We've got quite a few people coming into the fore. Yunus, Al-Andalusi, Mahdi, who I'm going to do some collaborations with. So inshallah, more people prop up, use social media and propagate the reality, because without the reality, you'd think the Ottomans are barbarians, Andalusis are barbarians, the Arabs are barbarians, but alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So, barakallahu feek, Pablo. It was a pleasure having you. And jazakallah khair for enlightening us. And inshallah,
pleasure to be here.
We'll have you again, inshallah.
Inshallah, definitely have to be done.
Inshallah. All right. Barakallahu feek. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, bro. See you soon.